and welcome to episode 45 of the Virtual Velo Podcast with me, Emma Martin, and my co-host, Chris Schwenker. Now, Chris, I know you are looking forward to today because we welcome to the podcast three academics from Purdue University, and you interviewed them back in January for a piece that you wrote.
Yeah, actually, I'm really looking forward to catching up with Professor Mansson and his team. I had the honor of interviewing them back in January for the cycling news piece I wrote entitled UCI Develops Smart Trainer Standardization Process to Level the Esports Playing Field. Shortly before then, when I was in Abu Dhabi, I interviewed Michael Rogers, who was then the head of esports for the UCI. When I asked him about the cheating culture in cycling esports, he said, and I quote, "We are quite advanced in the homologation of smart trainers. We are prepared to announce something in the next 2 to 3 months." Well, there's been a major transition at the UCI with Michael Rogers moving on, and those several months have passed. The esports worlds are rapidly approaching as the federation's preparations are showing. The community is extremely interested in an update on the status of the homologation program. Many agree that the sport must standardize and set a bar for the hardware. It's a tangible nuts and bolts program that we can put our finger on as opposed to the many other policies that we are still trying to figure out. And I'm excited to find out where we are with it.
Well, as Chris mentions, our guests from Purdue University. Purdue University is a public university in the USA, in Indiana, for our listeners who aren't aware, with over 50,000 students from 135 countries. Its accolades include being in the top 10 most innovative schools in the US for the past 6 years, and in the top 10 in the USA for engineering, which is where our guests come in. So Professor Jan-Anders Mansson is a distinguished professor of Materials and Chemical Engineering and the Executive Director of the Ray Erie Sports Engineering Centre. Patrick Cavanaugh, a research engineer and triathlete, as well as Teal Dowd, who is a PhD associate. Well, it's really great to have the three of you join us on the Virtual Velo Podcast today to talk about homologation. Now, that's a really interesting word to start with, really. And I know Chris's piece previously, but what is equipment homologation?
Okay, when we say homologation, maybe a simple way to say it is certification. But homologation, the whole purpose is to make sure we maintain a level playing field in the sport. We have a certification process that then homologate. It could be in equipment, it could be in apparel, and by that we can ensure that we have a level playing field. We also want to make sure we stay within certain safety and security boundaries. And normally also we look after that we don't change the spirit of a sport too much. And within there we try to homologate, have as much innovation as possible, but also to homologate or certificate new equipment and apparels to be accurate for the sport of its time.
When was it exactly that you began homologating equipment for the IOC? I know that there was a big to-do around some swimsuits that you were involved in, so perhaps you can tell us about that and then how it evolved into cycling.
It's a good question. In 2009, I was just finishing up my work with the Swiss America's Cup, and there started to be issues with, at that time called FINA, now World Aquatics. The swimsuit, we had free fall of world record during half a year due to the technical, build up of the swimsuits. At that time, the president of the federation said, if you can deal with America's Cup boat, I'm sure you can deal with the issues we have with the swimsuits. That's how I entered into it. Of course, at that time, it was a big issue for the swimming federation. World records was falling left and right. And by that, we were not sure if we were measuring the quality of the swimsuit or the quality of the swimmer sometimes. And by that, we needed to have a sort of homologation or standardization.
It's interesting that you mentioned the America's Cup boats because now America's Cup boats have cyclors that are replacing grinders. So you might be circling back to be doing some cycling homologation on these sailing vessels. But that kind of brings us to asking you the question, how did you get involved in cycling? I know that it wasn't with smart trainers. It was with real world bikes and the use of motors and motor doping and other equipment standards. So perhaps you can let us know how you transitioned into cycling and then through your relationship with the UCI.
So being in Lausanne, where I worked at that time, you are very close to all the federation. Here is the head office of the swimming federation, the head office of the biking federation, the cycling federation. So I was contacted to look into how we could do a smarter homologation certification of the bicycle frames. And at about the same time, there came the issue of are there motors in the bicycles? I was asked if I was ready to look into a technique that could be used to test if there was motors in the bicycle. And that was very much for the reason to cool down that discussion that was overheated. And those swimming and the UCI, that all happened within a couple of years time frame. But both was related to how do we make sure it's fair, clean, and a level playing field?
Because it's interesting, isn't it, that discussion around swimsuits or swimmers, the discussion around bicycles or cyclists, the actual riders, very, very similar as well. And it is indeed 6 years since the issue around the allegations about the motor in the cyclocross bike that was right up in the fore as well. So really interesting to hear that you were involved and around in that. So how did that then transition into esports and e-cycling and trainers and smart bikes?
So over the years, I've had very good relation with the Olympic Committee here, IOC, and also with many of the international sport federation. I've had a very constructive relation and discussion with them ongoing all the time. And that led to when the issue came up about the virtual trainer. We actually, after seeing what happened, that was in the beginning of COVID, when we had the classics going on in Northern Europe. And we saw that the people that won was primarily using the same trainer. People that other trainers didn't win. And that we said, are they really measuring the right thing, the same thing? And now, how can we start to certify, homologate the trainers so they keep a certain standard or tolerance standard to what they're supposed to do. And from there on, the work started, but now we are into a very complicated equipment to measure that, and also to handle the cybersecurity, the data transfer security, which is another risk for manipulation.
Yeah, so it was a very difficult time for sports throughout the world, right? We couldn't get together. Things were transitioning to become virtual, and that's when we had the virtual Tour of Flanders was in 2020. And very astute that you noticed that all the guys that were using the same trainers were winning the events. In one way, it shined a spotlight on the way that virtual sport could revolutionize what we're doing, but it also shined a spotlight on the negative aspects of it. And it's a pretty amazing that we've gotten to this point and you recognize that there was a problem there. I think that Greg Van Avermaet actually won that race. Can you describe to us the actual equipment, if you can, in a basic way? How does it actually measure the accuracy, the inter and intra-rater reliability of the smart trainers?
No, so just to add to the previous question, I should also mention Wim Sweldens. He was working with those virtual races with his company Kiswi. So it was in collaboration with him we start to dig into it. But coming on to your question here about the trainer, how it works and how the approach to develop it, I leave that question to Teal or Patrick. I think you have been very much have your head into the details of that. So I'll let you answer the question.
Hi, yes, I'm Teal Dowd, and I have been working on this project since the very initial idea was brought to me by Dr. Mansson saying, hey, can we do something about the homologation of these smart trainers? Is there something that we could design and put together? And me and two other students at the time were like, yes, let's do that. So what, in essence, this homologation rig is we have a motor, which is your virtual rider, and that turns the crankshaft of the smart trainer, and we know exactly how much power we are putting into the smart trainer, and then we know how much power it is reporting that it is being received. And then by comparing these two numbers, we know what the accuracy is of the trainer in terms of, is it setting the correct resistance as per the regulations through the protocol, as well as is it reading the correct amount of power, so that the amount of power you're coming out of your legs, is that correctly being reported to, say, the virtual race platform.
And how much, Teal, did the variance differ?
When it comes to power reading accuracy, I think we've seen, Patrick, double check me on this, but I think we've seen things over 10 to 20% under the worst case conditions. And another case where trainers have a very wide range is their ability to correctly simulate the road gradient in the condition of a race. This is where many of them are failing 100%, 200%. They are not simulating the 15% grade road that you're going up. They may still be only 5 or 10% off on power, but they're not simulating that gradient.
Yeah, I think I actually read a paper that you authored in last year called Apparatus and Methodology for Smart Train Homologation Analysis. And it was striking that the power reading was in excess of 16% on a couple of the models, but the resistance error was 100% in some. And I know that it involves a very extensive protocol that you use. Patrick or Teal, you can let us know. I think some of our audience will be really interested in geeking out on this, because I know that you have 6 parameters that you use during this 2-hour protocol to assess these different makes and models of trainers.
Yeah, so the protocol really tries to cover a very wide range of any conditions that you would see in a virtual race. So taking information from previous races, we can see that, generally you're going to see gradients from that 15% to like -8. So we take it through a whole bunch of different power conditions at gradient conditions between those extrema to paint a very precise picture of how the trainer is performing across all of these operating conditions. So, you asked about variance. So we can actually see trends on how different units perform across these different conditions with that high level of precision. Some have trends in how they behave with different combinations of flywheel speed and input torque, while others have a seemingly more random distribution in their behavior across the operating range. And then through testing multiple units, we can look at both, how those units test against themselves. So in intra-unit repeatability, and then we have inter-unit repeatability, where we take multiple units from the same manufacturer, the same make and model, and then test those with the same protocol to see how well the manufacturers are controlling their production process and how that results in performance in the field.
So I know that you're not only testing these trainers at a steady state, you're testing how quickly they ramp up, the delay when they ramp up, the delay when they ramp down, the resistance command accuracy, the inertial resistance accuracy, the coasting resistance accuracy, in addition to the fact that the trainers behave differently under different conditions. When they warm up, when they get hot, they react differently. They react differently under different power. Perhaps you can give us some insight into, all the different factors and different conditions that you need to take into effect to actually standardize and measure a trainer under the stress of the experience during an international esports race.
Yeah, it's a very complicated piece of machinery. These are built to the same level that a lot of consumer electronics are, and they're trying to do a very complicated job. I think one of the analogies that I've used in talking about the project is, in a lot of traditional sport, the equipment is an interface between the athlete and the environment, where in this case, the equipment is now trying to replicate the environment. So that is a huge importance that environment is being replicated the same across all competitors, because they don't have that standard gravity variable or standard air resistance variable that they're all going to be working against as you would if you're all in the peloton. But that also, highlights the demands that the equipment has to be able to perform to accurately simulate everything that someone would encounter during a simulated cycling race. So, we try and look at the ones that are going to have the most impact on the outcome of the race, and that's going to be the power accuracy as the primary, given that information coming out of the trainer is being fed into whatever virtual platform you're using. And that's going to directly dictate the avatar speed during race. So that's going to be your primary variable going into, the outcome of those races. But then secondary, like you said, those response times can vary. We did find that it was a little bit like the variance between the trainers was actually quite low compared to the variance of just the standard AMP plus transmission. So, at best, your AMP plus is transmitting at 4 hertz. That's 4 data packets per second. So, you're going to have a variance of a quarter second just between when that data packet is being transmitted. And then the variance in between units didn't really exceed that. So it was of less concern with some looking into it with some more detail. But then, like you said, that resistance command accuracy is how the trainer feels against the rider. So, you're going to have different combination. If it feels different to the rider, that's going to play into their mindset a little bit. Obviously, it's difficult to quantify feel sometimes, but it definitely is a big influence on how people perform. So making sure that feel is consistent as possible, or as consistent as we can measure it. And then another thing you mentioned that we've looked into is that that repeatability with heat buildup. So is the trainer measuring the same thing at the beginning of the race versus the end of the race? And we've seen, varying degrees of success against that as well. And someone could take advantage of that if they know it's a weakness, then they'll purposefully heat their trainer up, and they'll know it'll read differently. So being able to identify that variance and control it with regulation is going to be the most important part of this.
So, Patrick, really interesting, particularly only because of a conversation I had with a rider at the weekend following a race with the temperature raising 10 degrees from 24 degrees at the start of the race to 34 degrees at the end of the race an hour and a half later. And the rider messaging me and saying that actually physically they'd suffered really badly with the change of temperature themselves, but to hear that their actual trainer could have suffered it sounds as though more positively than the actual rider in the heat.
I think it depends because, like we said, we've seen inconsistent behavior between makes and models. Sometimes the accuracy would deviate in a way that would benefit the rider. So if it's deviating away from true zero, if it's going up, we'll say if it's going up, then it's providing a disadvantage to other riders because it's over-reporting the power of the rider that it's measuring. But if it's deviating negative, then it's providing that person a disadvantage. And in this case, because we're trying to simulate the environment, any deviation, positive or negative, is going to upset that level playing field. So we have to, we can't treat a positive or negative deviation any differently.
Manufacturers are now putting out newer models that claim that the power accuracy is better than their older models. Is that the case? Have you seen that with the different models and the different makes of trainers and smart bikes that you've been testing?
Well, I guess I can say that there is a newer and a older model of one of the smart trainer brands, and one of them claims to have a higher accuracy than the other, and it does in fact have a higher accuracy. But we have still noticed across the board, none of them seem to be hitting the actual accuracy target that they claim on the packaging, but some of them come much, much closer across the board than others do. And we look forward to testing more of these much newer models to compare them against the older or the mid-range models.
You're speaking about testing these models, right? I guess it brings us to the main question here is the practical implications of this program. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, how is the partnership with the UCI? Because as I mentioned in the opening, Michael Rogers told me that they'd be announcing your program within 2 months, and we haven't heard anything. So are they still funding the program? Is it still moving forward? Are we still in a positive way with that?
First of all, I must say that there is certain federations that are extremely concerned about the quality of the competition. And in this case, with Virtual Trainer, it's kind of a new product. And I highly appreciate the way UCI have been thinking. They really try to go in and make sure they understand what is the difference and so on. And then our relation with UCI is have been and is very good. Then for UCI's decision, there is many variants coming in that there's many pieces of this puzzle that UCI have in their hand. We are just giving them one piece of the puzzle, and that is the equipment. How good is it? And I think in that interaction, our collaboration with UCI is extremely positive. And we quite honestly, we're going to have a big meeting tomorrow with them. And it's always very constructive. And they are building up competencies themselves in the field, which is good. We also hope, of course, one day they employ our students. Huh? We are a university after all. We help to build up competencies in a field that there is an interest to gain knowledge in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, we should tell the listeners that Dr. Mansson's team is actually recording from Lucerne, Switzerland, where they're going to be meeting with the UCI and the other federations. So it's very nice of you to take time out from that for us. Mm-hmm. So then the other aspect to consider are the companies, the manufacturers. I think when I interviewed you in January, you made it very clear to us that you are not the smart trainer police. And I think that goes into the way that you're communicating with the companies and the collaboration that you have there. So perhaps you can explain how that goes and what you mean by not being the smart trainer police.
Oh, it's good. It's good what you're saying there. I always see myself, if I can fall back to what we have done with swimsuit now for 15 years, what is it about? It's to make sure there is as many companies as possible involved in developing product for the sport. That is good for the sport. It generates sponsorship, it generates interest and bigger market volume as well. So for that, what is done with the company is extremely important. So how do you make sure now that I don't want to be considered police. And one way to not be considered as a police is to make sure we have regular meeting. At least once a year, we have a meeting with the manufacturer to discuss what have been the issues during the last year's submissions. And now give them a chance to resubmit. You might have an issue with this, you might have an issue with another, but please resubmit. We tell you what is the issue here. So at the end of the submission or approval process, I want all of them to pass. But the day we don't create a level playing field, the whole sport suffers. Then we start to say, he won for he had that, or she won due to use that. Then the whole sport suffer, and they all goes down in relevance. And as I said, if it's going to be Olympic sport, there's not an Olympic sport that gets seriously taken if you don't guarantee a level playing field. And that is why I think when you are doing homologation, you're there to make sure as many as possible of the manufacturer get through the process and sharing our knowledge with them as much as we can. They can even use our equipment if they want to look at when we do their homologation. So nothing is hidden behind black curtains.
So from a racer's perspective, also really important to think you are on a level playing field with everybody else. You want that fair competition and you want to know that you won fairly or that you participated fairly. A lot of the platforms now, particularly with elite level competition, are starting to limit the number of makes and models of trainers or smart bikes that the elite racers can use during high level competition. Is that the best way for the platforms to respond to this type of work? Or is that not being driven from this type of work? Is that being driven from another place?
Sorry, just to understand your question, you mean that UCI will just use a limited number of trainers that can be used, or?
Well, not just the UCI, the actual platforms themselves. So the esports platforms themselves are dictating in race manuals now a smaller number of trainers that racers and participants can use as part and parcel of their elite level activity. So rather than a list that may have started out with 10 different makes and models on, those lists are now down to about 5, so becoming much more exclusive in terms of the types of trainers or smart bikes they're expecting the elite athletes to use. Is this, well, I suppose what I'm asking is this the right way forward for the platforms in terms of moving towards ensuring that level playing field?
Yeah, I think you say it the right way. I think it is the right way forward. Now is the question, when do you start to limit competition? And that we always have to be concerned about. If we start to limit the number that can participate, of course, there can come up other issues. But that's way beyond our we say task in this discussion. I know there is a lot of activity going on in event planning and event organization and event financing, and we can just let them know this equipment that you have chosen, we consider them being good or semi-good or not good, and that is. But there is many pieces to that puzzle that coming into running the sport event itself, and I think those question is the one running the event, including UCI, to answer those.
It's refreshing that you say that you want to have as much competition as possible, because when I did write the article, one of the major criticisms was this is just the UCI's way of putting a UCI stamp on the trainers, and then the trainer manufacturers can double the price of them because you have to use a UCI sanctioned trainer, and it's going to just disrupt the market because we're never going to be able to afford a race certified trainer. How would you respond to that after saying that you want to have as much competition in the marketplace as possible?
You bring up a very good question. That had been for 15 years the discussion with the swimsuits manufacturers as well. You get the stamp on the swimsuit and you can increase the price on your product. Of course, there is a cost related to the homologation, but if you sell a number of 100 or 1,000 of trainers, that cost is minimal. It's very minimal. So it will not be a cost that is trickling down to the customer in big numbers. I think the only thing how we can, in some way or another, limit is to say what kind of quality parameters are we going to have. We accept variation within 2% or within 5% or within 10%. So I can imagine, depending how the discussion goes, that we can rank them. This is a trainer of level A or level B or level C. And if that's then related to cost of the trainers, there might be people say, for my need of the trainer, the level C is good enough.
To add on to the question which was asked a little bit earlier regarding the platforms setting their own list, I think some of the positive of us providing the UCI with the information to be able to create their own list and their own certification process is to make sure that that list is fairly created. Because us coming in as an independent party, coming in, doing some critical testing on this equipment and then setting out these standards, I think is going to make a much more robust version of what the platforms are starting to do as kind of a quick interim. Is they're like, we have a problem, we need to fix it. The way we can fix it is just pick these which we think or know in some regard are performing best or well enough. But I think with doing the full homologation process will bring a lot more credibility to lists like that, and we hope to provide that data.
Yeah, and I think even to add on to Dr. Mansson's point about, we'll call it the disruption of the marketplace, his original point, or one of the previous points, said that, we want to have all the manufacturers to be able to succeed at the standard of a fair competition. As long as we can create a commercial space, or not we, but as long as the process can create a commercial space that continues to encourage competition between the manufacturers, they'll still be able to outcompete each other of who can provide a quality product at an affordable price to be able to increase their own market share. Now, I think this will just introduce another constraint on their business or on their product requirements. But we don't want to. No one would want the discipline to become inaccessible because it's fair. Those are two trade-offs that can't be. Those are not mutually exclusive trade-offs, and they can't be.
So would we expect, sort of going back to this sort of event and platform area, events like the UCI Cycling Esports World Championships, a potential esports cycling Olympics, would we be expecting to see all of the trainers utilised during those events certified?
This is still to be seen, which way IOC and UCI decide to go. Even if you have the same brand and the same model, it doesn't mean that they automatically measure the same thing. So I still think it's important to have a validation of the trainer, even if it's the same. Then, of course, when you have a high-level competition like that, if you start to have all kind of different trainers, you better make sure they are homologated and also tested before. That apparatus itself, not just the model, that apparatus itself is tested before the competition.
So there'll be 20 of them used for the final in Abu Dhabi in October. Should we expect that those will all be homologated and certified?
I'm sure UCI will make sure that they are on the level of creating a level playing field. That I know UCI well enough to feel that's going to happen. It's too risky otherwise. It's too risky if you can't guarantee that you have a level playing field.
Well, you would know, right? They'd have to send the 20 of them to you to test, wouldn't they?
That's one way it can be done, or we can send our testers, or we can send our people. It's a collaboration here. Say if you are in academia, you're a professor, this is probably not the way to go to earn a lot of money. Probably the way to go to earn a lot of reputation in the sport. And that's how I like to see it. And this is always when I work also with the Olympics, it's about how can we make sport the highest value possible. And then it's about being fair, being clean. That's about what it is.
It sounds a lot like being an esports journalist. No money, and a little bit of reputation for something that very few cyclists want to read about. But anyway, I'm finding this conversation extremely interesting. So
I can add on to your joke there. I started up in composite material, carbon fiber thing, and aerospace and fancy application. And there was a time for some years ago, people said the only one earning money on composite are the one organizing conferences.
I understand that totally. So the last time that we spoke, you said that you had one unit. Have you created more? And then I know the model that you had proposed when we spoke was that you would have these units strategically positioned throughout the world so that you could then scale up the program and have it meet the requirements for the growing sport. What is the status of that at this point?
This falling back to how we decided to do in the swimsuit case, we developed a special permeability tester that measure air permeability through the garments, through the textile at different positions. To develop the technique for that, then we say here is the process and the buildup of the equipment, and then we had a company to build it, and that company can then sell the equipment. I don't think it's of anyone's interest to have an equipment that no one knows how it works. The more that have the equipment, the better. Then the company say it's too expensive for us to buy the equipment. Okay, then we have they can use our equipment for their testing. They're coming to our lab and they can use our equipment and test their product. Again and again, as many as possible should be able to gain the knowledge, either by buying the equipment or testing at our equipment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I know that there are other areas of homologation that you're looking into, Patrick and Teal, aside from smart trainers. I know that you're looking into branching out to smart bikes, which is the wave of the future for a lot of the racers, and also the data manipulation, the ANT Plus protocols, the Bluetooth protocols. I know that you've done a significant amount of work into that. And Michael Rogers mentioned that when I was in Abu Dhabi also. He went as far as to say, we know it's being hacked because we've hacked it in our own laboratory. So can you give us a little bit of insight into the work that you're doing as far as that's concerned?
I let Teal answer that question, but he said it takes me less than 5 minutes to hack the system. So he knows how to hack it as well.
Yes, there are some pretty well-published methods for how to hack the ANT Plus standard. It is great for what it was designed to do, but it has been expanded to being used for races, and that's not where it excels particularly when it comes to the safety. So we have been working with the Serious Security Institute here at Purdue University, and together we have explained what the problem is, and they have helped us come up with a solution for how to do a end-to-end encrypted and signed messaging system within the existing framework of communication, so that it can be known where the power is coming from, as in it's coming from this unit that you're writing on, not someone else's unit, and that it has not been manipulated between the time it exits the device until it is decrypted onto the race simulation server. So that has been developed, and in a way such that it should minimize the impact for trainer manufacturers to be able to implement this within the existing ecosystem. And we think that this is an extremely important part of the approach for the homologation, because without assuring that that entire chain of custody of that data is secure, then we don't have assured that this is going to be a fair race.
May I just add one thing to what Teal said here? We contacted Cirrus. So this Cybersecurity Institute at Purdue is highly, highly respected and work with the defense industry and military industry in general. We came with this simple trainer and security. We thought it was not in their interest at all. It gained such an interest, and 3-4 of the very smartest brain wanted to work on this project. There you see the value of working with sport, that it easily gather interest from people with high competence. So we have had fantastic interaction with those people and are working forward with them.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna have another positive shout out to the Sirius group that we've been working with. And one thing to note on the solution that they've developed is that it's agnostic to the communication protocol. So while like AMP+ is the industry standard, a lot of manufacturers are moving to support or move their support to Bluetooth for more device capability. Then you've even seen the arrival of Direct Connect protocols for higher performance connections. So the idea is, regardless, so that this protocol actually sits a layer below the communication protocol. So regardless of how that information is transmitted, it's always transmitted in a secure fashion. So, the experience that they have has proven extremely valuable to this problem, because it's a very similar problem to the other like defense or security related things that they'll look into on a daily basis. It's just has a little bit more of a visible and public facing application. Chris, another note you brought up is the use of smart bikes. So this has been a question that we've been muddling over a little bit, as at the time of the start of this project, smart trainers was the dominant architecture for these races. Companies have started to release new products. We can adapt both the testing procedure and the equipment to test a smart bike in a very similar way, as long as we can have some kind of mechanical connection to the power input. So whether that's some kind of specialized adapter put on the crank arm to be able to turn the flywheel. I think something that we've heard in our discussions is that manufacturers assure that the internals of these smart bikes are the same or very similar to the trainers. But if we have the equipment, we can test it. We can verify that ourselves.
Maybe one thing I should mention in this equipment now that we have been working on for these years, and also seen working up its accuracy and the tolerance of measurement. It turned out to be on the level that it's an extremely good way also to test the chains, different lubrication. We can clearly measure different lubrications effects on degradation of the chain. So that's more to show that we can measure this marginal gains effect on it. And I was very impressed when Teal and Patrick showed me that.
Well, I was actually going to ask Teal particularly, because I had read around your work on chain lubricants and performance enhancements, and whether they did indeed enhance performance, different lubricants. And I was wondering particularly for our listeners around riding indoors, and obviously the environment around riding indoors versus riding outdoors, and whether there are, how should we say, better products to put on your chain if you are an indoor specialist than if you are an outdoor specialist.
So we have been doing quite a bit of testing on chain lubricants and the efficiency of them. Actually, in a few days, I will be presenting on the work that I and Patrick have done on how to quantify the efficiency of a cycling chain across a wide variety of different power and torque and cadence conditions, and presenting a new metric we call the Dowd Cavanaugh metric, which has a very, very high R-squared value for a correlation for the efficiency compared to the riding condition. And overall, some of the testing we've done is showing that the paraffin-based, the wax-based lubricants, they last a very long time, particularly in these inside clean conditions, and at least the certain ones have very high efficiency as well. So for those indoor cyclists that want to get the best ride for quite a long time, yes, you have a little bit more overhead to do the cleaning and the immersion process, but boy, do they they last quite a long time.
Definitely something, Chris, for our listeners to take away, as long with the entire conversation from today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the real exciting thing is that everyone that's involved in a project like this, or who's a racer or an esports enthusiast, is that the end goal is the Olympics, right? Once our sport gets into the Olympics, then it opens up a tremendous amount of possibilities as far as funding, as far as awareness, as far as popularity. And I know that you've been putting out a lot on your socials at the center there concerning the Olympics recently, Dr. Mansson and the crew. What is your feeling as far as the homologation program? Is it a step towards the credibility that we need to eventually be in the Olympics, or just a more philosophical question? Do you envision a day when cycling esports will be an Olympic sport? And then what possibilities does that open up? I know that you've mentioned on your socials also that maybe we'll see a day where cycling esports racers will be racing on a virtual course, and then MNI could join them and stack up against them and not be involved in the overall competition. I know it's a lot to digest there, but I'm curious. The Olympics is something that always comes up because it's perhaps the end goal for a sport that's evolving. I'd just like to get your opinion on that.
Oh, it's a good question. Yes, imagine, wouldn't this fantastic at the Olympic Games? You have 20 or 50 or we say 100 virtual riders on the stage. You're watching them. At the same time, you have 6 million at home competing against them. Isn't that moving sport to the general public in a fantastic way? And you can start to measure yourself against the best. Real time, live. Of course, that's a direction that is interested. There is a lot of potential for, we say, the Olympics. I differ slightly between esport and what I call hybrid sport. Esport is for me sometimes where you operate something very skillful, but with your finger controller. Hybrid sport, you use the skill or the muscular capability of an athlete in combination with the electronic device. And I think when we talk about the smart trainer competition is hybrid sport. And I think that is a great way to reach a lot of new people. And you can have competition like in many of these e-basing over continents. And so I think it's totally along IOC's interest to grow the sport to as many as possible, but have a competition as a model, a driving model in it. And I should say all along, we are always in very close contact with IOC and ask advice or see what can be the best next step to take. And so far, I always see them as very positive to this virtual cycling. I've never seen. And we should always also think it's not to replace conventional cycling. It's a new event we add to it. Take swimming. They added event, acrobatic swimming. So that you add events to and that today is a very popular event. Virtual cycling might engage new people that can be in this sport. And we can also engage people that have some kind of handicap. They can compete. So I think it opens up sports enormously. And I think we are on the right way with all this kind of virtual cycling, no doubt.
I cannot agree more with everything that you said there, Dr. Mansson. And we, Emma and I, really appreciate the fact that you took the time away from your meetings there in Lucerne. The next thing on the horizon for us is the Esports World Championships. It's coming up, and I know, Emma, you've been keeping a close watch on all these federations and their selection criteria, and I know that you want to give a bit of a rundown on that, because I know that even some of them are doing some test events as we speak.
Yeah, so moving from the future of the Olympics and virtual cycling and what it could be in this emerging new discipline to the World Championships. And you're right, Chris, the selecting bodies from the national federations have indeed been populating their websites with forms for nominations and expressions of interest and clear guidance on how they are choosing their teams for the esports World Cycling event in October. So New Zealand have published their world selection criteria. They've already held test events. Canada is on the ball too. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Belgium have got events on this week. And what I do need to say is congratulations to our guests, Josh Harris and Kate Tridden, who joined us on episode 43 as per the Australian selection criteria, the top 2 males and top 2 females at the national championships this year in Australia make the list to the start line at the semi-finals. Kate Tridden finishing in first place in that women's competition. Josh Harris taking second in the men's. They've both booked themselves a place at the semi-finals in September. So congratulations to them. And Josh, I believe it's your birthday as well today. So happy birthday from both Chris and I as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a chance to wish Josh a happy birthday earlier today. And I also had an opportunity to speak to the competitive team over at USA Cycling, who confirmed with me that they're in the process of creating a qualifying series to then solidify their selection criteria for the esports worlds coming up. And I'll have some more information as I have an interview with them upcoming soon. And I just want to again reiterate to Dr. Mansson, Patrick, and Teal, incredibly interesting. This is, like I said earlier, it's something that we can wrap our heads around. It's a mechanical way to move the sport forward and to standardize the environment for our sport, as you very aptly made the analogy earlier, Patrick. See the interface between the athlete and the metaverse, the environment that we're creating, and it needs to be standardized. It needs to be up to par, because right now it's a bit all over the place. And I'm really excited for the fact that you and the team are the ones that are spearheading this effort moving forward.
Just if I can add one point here, I very much appreciate that you see the value of what we are doing. Of course, that makes a huge motivation for us. If you want to imagine what's in my head when I work with this kind of certification and homologations, and now we end where we started, we need a room for innovation. Every sport needs innovation. Sport has to be part of its time. We can't say, oh no, esport, that's not what we should be, and we should not do this with the new soccer ball. No, innovation should flood into our sport, but we must have some limit. On those limits, there have to be one, as I've said now too many times, the level playing field. There is one limit that have to be safety and security, both for the athlete and spectators. And then we should not change the tradition of the sport so people can connect to it anymore. It must be something they can emotionally connect to. The other limit of this innovation field have to be big enough so company can earn money. If company don't earn money, we don't get sponsors, we athletes don't have support. And so we have to have innovation. So now who is setting that innovation field? There's 3 players. There's the athletes, there's the manufacturer, and the federation. Those 3 have to interact. So between the athlete and the manufacturer, they should push limit as much as they possibly can. That's the evolution of the sport. At the same time, between the federation and the manufacturer, we have to make sure we have a healthy evolution so we stay fair competition. And then between the federation and the athletes, we have to make sure it brings value to the athlete. He's the one that offers hours and education and family life. We make sure there's value for him. The day we say, oh, he's not that good, it's due to this equipment he used, he was good. Then it all falls apart. So those 3 have to work together. And I think this is where I feel we have a good interaction with UCI, and over the years have with the Swimming Federation as well. Just to summarize what's in my head when I deal with this, and that is the vision that leads me when we talk about it.
Well, I think that vision is a fantastic place to finish today. And it leaves me to say thank you very much to our guests from Purdue University. Next time on the Virtual Velo Podcast, we will be speaking to Richard Vale from Flan Rouge Racing about the innovative tri-platform Mytika's Games. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and you want to know more, you can follow, like, or subscribe to the Zoommunique. You can follow me at Biking Emma on Instagram or at Full Speed Events. We'll be back in 2 weeks with episode 46 of the Virtual Velo Podcast. Until then, stay safe, enjoy your riding. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.